he made his own stars. When Wendell Fertig decided to promote himself from lieutenant colonel to brigadier general without authorization, without orders, without permission from anyone on Earth, he had a problem. He was standing in a jungle on a Japanese-occupied island in the Philippines with no uniform shop, no supply depot, and no tailor. So he made the general's stars himself, cut from whatever metal he could find, pinned to the collar of a uniform that was falling apart. A man who had appointed himself commander of a resistance movement that didn't exist yet, wearing rank insignia he had fabricated by hand, standing in front of Filipino fighters and American stragglers and telling them that they were now an army, and they believed him. Not because the stars looked real, they didn't. Not because he had the authority, he didn't. They believed him because the alternative was surrender, and surrender meant prison camps where men were dying by the thousands. Wendell Fertig was offering something else, a fight, a purpose, a reason to stay in the jungle instead of walking out with their hands up. Within a year, his army numbered in the thousands. Within 2 years, it controlled large swaths of the second-largest island in the Philippines. Within 3 years, it had grown to over 30,000 fighters, a force so effective that when the Americans finally returned to liberate the islands, Fertig's guerrillas added 6 full divisions to the invasion force. A self-appointed general with homemade stars had built one of the largest and most successful guerrilla movements of the entire Second World War, and he had done it on an island that the rest of the world had written off as lost. Wendell Welby Fertig was born on December 16, 1900, in La Junta, Colorado, a railroad town on the plains of southeastern Colorado, where the Arkansas River cuts through the scrubland and the sky is bigger than anything underneath it. He was an engineer, not a career soldier. He attended the University of Colorado and graduated from the Colorado School of Mines in 1924 with a degree in mining engineering. He held a reserve commission in the Army Corps of Engineers, the part-time military obligation that thousands of American professionals carried in the years between the wars. In 1936, Fertig moved to the Philippines. The islands were an American territory, and there was work for mining engineers, consultants who could survey terrain, assess mineral deposits, and build the infrastructure that the colonial economy required. He spent 5 years there. He learned the land. He learned the people. He learned the jungle. That knowledge, the kind that comes from years of walking terrain on foot, mapping rivers, understanding which paths lead through mountains and which lead to dead ends, would become the most valuable thing he possessed when the Japanese came. On December 20th, 1941, 13 days after Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces invaded the Philippines. The fall of the Philippines was swift and devastating. Japanese forces overwhelmed American and Filipino defenders on Luzon. The retreat to Bataan and Corregidor became one of the most agonizing chapters of the entire war. Tens of thousands of soldiers forced into a shrinking perimeter, starving, diseased, fighting an enemy that outnumbered them in every way. Fertig was called to active duty and assigned to the Army Corps of Engineers. His job during the retreat was to destroy anything the Japanese might use: bridges, supply depots, equipment, vehicles. He was methodical about it. When he reached the docks, he drove his brand-new Dodge automobile off the pier and into Manila Bay. If the Japanese wanted his car, they could fish it out of the harbor. He was promoted twice in the chaos, reaching lieutenant colonel by April 1942. He was sent from Bataan to Mindanao, the massive southern island, to assist General William Sharp in building emergency airfields. On May 10, 1942, General Sharp received orders to surrender all American and Filipino forces on Mindanao. Some men obeyed. Tens of thousands laid down their weapons and walked into Japanese captivity, into prison camps where disease, starvation, and brutality would kill thousands. Wendell Fertig did not surrender. He looked at the order. He looked at the jungle. He made a choice that would define the next 3 years of his life and change the course of the war in the Philippines. He walked into the mountains and disappeared. Mindanao was the perfect place to vanish. Nearly 100,000 square kilometers of jungle, mountains, rivers, and coastline, much of it unmapped, some of it unexplored. The Japanese controlled the cities and the ports. The interior belonged to whoever was willing to live in it. Fertig was willing. He wasn't alone. Scattered across Mindanao were pockets of American soldiers and civilians who had refused to surrender. Engineers, officers, enlisted men, miners, plantation workers. Filipino soldiers who had melted into the jungle rather than turn themselves in. Moro tribesmen, Muslim Filipinos in the southern islands who had been resisting outside authority for centuries and saw no reason to stop now. They were scattered, disorganized, leaderless. Small groups hiding in the jungle, surviving day to day with no communication, no coordination, and no plan. Wendell Fertig gave them one. In late 1942, he made the decision that changed everything. These scattered groups needed to be unified. They needed a chain of command. They needed someone with the authority, real or invented, to pull them together into something that could fight. A lieutenant colonel couldn't do it. The Filipino fighters and the scattered Americans wouldn't follow a mid-ranking officer they'd never heard of. The rank wasn't big enough for the mission. So Fertig promoted himself to brigadier general. He fabricated the stars. He pinned them to his collar. He began signing orders as Brigadier General, United States Forces in the Philippines. He sent messages to every pocket of resistance he could reach, announcing that a general had taken command and that the fight was not over. It was audacious. It was unauthorized. It was possibly illegal. And it worked. Men started coming out of the jungle. Americans who had been hiding for months. Filipino soldiers looking for someone to follow. Moro chieftains who respected authority and wanted to fight the Japanese. They saw the stars. They heard the title. They joined. Building an army from nothing in the middle of an enemy-occupied island required solving problems that no military manual had prepared Fertig for. He needed weapons. The guerrillas began with whatever they could scavenge: old rifles, captured Japanese arms, homemade weapons crafted from scrap metal. Filipino blacksmiths built crude grenades. Guerrilla workshops assembled firearms from parts salvaged across the island. He needed communication. This was the critical piece. Without radio contact with MacArthur's headquarters in Australia, Fertig was a self-appointed general talking to himself. His engineers, the Americans who had refused to surrender, included several skilled technicians, built radio transmitters from salvaged parts and car batteries. The first message reached Australia in early 1943. MacArthur's staff was skeptical. A brigadier general on Mindanao? There was no brigadier general on Mindanao. The highest-ranking officer on that island should have been a lieutenant colonel at most. Fertig radioed back. He explained the situation. He described his forces. He requested supplies. MacArthur made a decision. Whether Fertig was a real general or a self-appointed one didn't matter. What mattered was that he had a functioning resistance movement on an island the Japanese thought they controlled. MacArthur authorized submarine supply runs to Mindanao. The submarines came at night. They surfaced off remote coastlines and delivered weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, radio equipment, and intelligence materials. They took out intelligence reports and Coast Watcher data that Fertig's network had collected on Japanese shipping movements. A self-appointed general, supplied by submarine, fighting a guerrilla war on an island the rest of the world had forgotten. The absurdity of it was matched only by its effectiveness. By 1943, Fertig's United States forces in the Philippines had grown into a genuine military organization. He recruited 187 Americans who had been hiding across Mindanao. Soldiers, civilians, engineers, planters, and gave them positions of leadership. He brought Moro chieftains into the command structure, respecting their authority in their own territories while integrating their fighters into the larger force. He established coastal watch stations that monitored every Japanese ship moving through Philippine waters. The intelligence from these stations was radioed to MacArthur's headquarters and to the submarines operating in the area. Japanese shipping losses in the region climbed steadily as Allied submarines used Fertig's intelligence to find their targets. He set up his own governance. In the areas his guerrillas controlled, which grew steadily as the Japanese were pushed back into their garrison towns, Fertig established civil administration. Schools reopened. Courts functioned. He even issued currency. A parallel government, operating in the jungle, funded by submarine deliveries and the loyalty of people who would rather follow a self-appointed American general than live under Japanese occupation. The Japanese tried to destroy him. Multiple times they launched major operations against the guerrillas, committing thousands of troops to sweep through the jungle and eliminate Fertig's forces. Each time, Fertig employed the same tactic: retreat, disperse, let the Japanese exhaust themselves chasing ghosts, then reform and hit them with ambushes and pinprick attacks as they withdrew. His force grew to approximately 32,000 personnel. Roughly 16,000 of them were armed. They faced 50,000 Japanese soldiers on Mindanao, and they held their own for 3 years. In late 1944, MacArthur returned to the Philippines. He kept his promise. "I shall return," he had said when he left in 1942. He returned with the largest naval force the Pacific had ever seen. When American troops landed on Mindanao in 1945, they found something that no one had expected. Large portions of the island were already under guerrilla control. Fertig's forces had intelligence networks in place, supply routes established, and fighters ready to join the liberation. Fertig's guerrillas contributed 6 divisions to the liberation of Mindanao. 6 divisions, 32,000 fighters, organized, armed, and ready, built from nothing over 3 years by a mining engineer from Colorado who had made himself a general because nobody else was going to do it. The Japanese garrison on Mindanao, expecting to fight only the invading Americans, found themselves fighting from 2 directions. The guerrillas attacked from the interior while the American forces pushed from the coast. The island was liberated faster than anyone had projected. General MacArthur, who had initially been skeptical of the self-appointed general on the radio, personally recognized Fertig's contribution. The Army awarded him the Distinguished Service Medal, the highest non-combat decoration, for exceptionally meritorious and distinguished services as commander of the Mindanao Visayan Force. After the war, Wendell Fertig went home. He returned to his civilian engineering career. But the Army wasn't done with him. In 1951, they brought him back. His experience, 3 years of guerrilla warfare, unconventional tactics, working with indigenous fighters, building an army from nothing behind enemy lines, was exactly what the Army needed for a new kind of conflict. The Cold War was beginning. The battlefields were shifting from open plains and beachheads to jungles, mountains, and villages where conventional armies were useless. The military needed soldiers who could do what Fertig had done: operate in small teams behind enemy lines, training local forces, fighting unconventional wars. Fertig was assigned to the Office of Psychological Warfare. He became the Special Forces Plans Officer, then Deputy Chief of Psychological Warfare. He helped establish the Army's Psychological Warfare Center at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. That center became the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, the home of the Green Berets. The man who had built a guerrilla army from nothing in the Philippine jungle helped build the organization that would train generations of American soldiers to do the same thing. In Vietnam, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in every unconventional battlefield that followed. Wendell Fertig didn't just fight a guerrilla war. He helped create the doctrine that the American military would use for the next 80 years. Wendell Welby Fertig died on March 24, 1975, in Golden, Colorado, not far from the School of Mines where he'd earned his engineering degree half a century earlier. He was 74 years old. He never received the Medal of Honor. He was never promoted to actual brigadier general by the official chain of command. The stars he wore for 3 years in the Philippine jungle were the ones he made himself, and the Army never formally endorsed the rank he had given himself. It didn't matter. The 32,000 men who followed him didn't follow stars. They followed the man who wore them, a mining engineer from Colorado who looked at a Japanese-occupied island, looked at the scattered remnants of a defeated army, and decided that someone had to lead. If nobody was going to appoint him, he would appoint himself. He drove his Dodge into Manila Bay rather than let the enemy have it. He walked into the jungle rather than walk into captivity. He made his own stars rather than wait for someone else to pin them on. And for 3 years, in the jungle, on an island the world had forgotten, a self-appointed general with homemade rank insignia ran a war that nobody authorized and nobody could stop. Brigadier General, United States Forces in the Philippines. He wrote the title himself. Then he earned it.